It's 2025, a new year and the best time to turn your great idea into a business. Shopify is how you're going to make it happen. Let me tell you how. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. Get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates. All you need to do is drag and drop. Their powerful social media tools let you connect all your channels and create shoppable posts. Established in 2025. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo. All lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/promo.
Hey loves, Haley Steinfeld here. Let's be real. When I'm on the red carpet, everyone wants to know whose dress I'm wearing. But here's the thing. We're so focused on those details, we're missing something that's actually way more important. Breast health. It's wild. Breasts get so much attention, but they're still so ignored when it matters most. Don't know what I'm talking about? Tune in on February 9th and visit yourattentionplease.com. That's yourattentionplease.com. See you then.
While his team tries to fix his Gaza plan, Donald Trump has already moved on because he's basically the norovirus. Every day he spews executive orders all over the place, and while we struggle to clean up all the puke, he comes out the other end with something even worse.
Quiet Riot. Welcome to Quiet Riot Sunday School, the granny flat to Thursday's mansion. I'm Naomi.
And I'm Alex. How's things, Naomi? You've had quite a busy week, haven't you?
Yes. I don't think either of us have been sleeping particularly well this week due to a combination of factors. And in the case of me, that is tearing across the channel, preparing a lot of work for release this weekend that we're going to be talking about later today, and just general life stress. How are you?
Yeah, I've not been sleeping very well, but for entirely different reasons, because the story of Echo and Narcissus is quite a difficult one to shape.
Wow.
But a very beautiful one, nevertheless.
Oh, I can't tell you the number of people who keep asking me, when will we get the Podyssey? I can't wait. And
listen.
Me too, but let's not pressure him.
Listeners, well, it's not that. I mean, as soon as we get the okay from the advertisers, because it's very unusual for a podcast to have advertising support from day one, right?
Exactly.
But the people we work with have listened to a couple of episodes and they're very, very keen. And so we will start with full advertising support, which is amazing. And so we're just waiting for the various agencies to give their okay. And as soon as we've got that, then we will launch. So it's going to be soon. I mean, I think it's going to be this month.
Woo! If you are a regular listener of the show and you value what we do, then this is your Sunday reminder that you can back us with a small monthly amount by heading over to ko-fi.com/quietriotpod. And if you already do that, thank you very much. And we found yet another way that you can support the show.
Indeed, we have. We often talk about books we've loved, and we have people on the show that have written books to talk about their latest publications. Well, now Quiet Riot has its very own bookshop containing some of our faves. More will be added all the time. We're adding titles all the time. You can visit uk.bookshop.org/shop/Quiet Riot. We'll drop a link in the show notes, obviously, and you'll be able to purchase them from a local independent bookshop. You can even choose which. Yeah, it's a sort of aggregator that offers a really good price, a really competitive price for the book, but it's actually sent out by a local bookshop. And you can even choose which one if you so wish. And Quiet Riot gets a tiny cut as well from every sale. So what's not to love?
Brilliant. And I guess we'll pop a link in the show notes to that as well. What do you want to talk about today, Alex? I mean, we just can't not talk about everything happening stateside. Like, I don't want to. I wish we could just ignore the big orange baby, but I don't think we can. Not least when it comes to foreign policy things like USAID that affect the whole world, not just America. But I was wondering if we could go through like the redundancies, the department closures, just do a bit of a recap on the whole vile mess of the last week.
Yeah, and we'll try to do it in a sort of strategic overview way rather than a gossipy way. And I know that you want to talk about economic growth and how to achieve it, because there's a major piece of work being released today. As this goes to listeners, we're recording on a Saturday, but on Sunday morning, this work is being released. And you can give us some exclusive detail.
I can. I think it's also been a relatively interesting week for Reform UK Limited. Let's have a quick chat about that.
Definitely. And I suspect the big sort of 6-hour cabinet meeting that happened on Friday was partly about sort of political strategy. So I think that will be a pretty full episode with those 3 topics.
Well, let's crack on.
Quiet riot.
So I don't even really know where to begin when it comes to talking about all the awful things Trump has been doing this week. But to my mind, at least, Alex, there seems little more egregious than his culling of the USAID department as he and Doge boss Musk seek to drastically reduce state spending. It was almost immediately after the inauguration that he ordered all US foreign aid to be paused effectively. You know, that brought USAID programs that cover life-saving aid across the globe to a completely grinding halt, which one can only assume puts millions of lives at risk pretty quickly, if not almost immediately. And now we've seen the furloughs, the redundancies, him wanting to reduce the size of the USAID workforce from around 10,000 to just a couple of hundred. And as we were coming in to record, I looked at what the latest was on that. And of course, the lawsuits have gone in, the unions are making noise about it, and a judge has imposed a pause on Musk's plans until at least the 14th of February, so that those disputes over the legality of the redundancies is picked over. So, Alex, this is obviously deeply distressing and worrying for anyone caught up in this, because they work for a US State Department, particularly USAID. One can only imagine if you were on maternity leave or about to go on maternity leave, how this might be affecting you. But the seriousness of the loss of aid globally from USAID, what measure of that can we even begin to conceive of? How serious could it get?
I mean, it is an extraordinary chain effect of events. Like you said, set aside the effect on the families of the people who actually work for that department, you know, who often have been situated in another country with their entire family for several years, and they're now being told, as of today, you're not getting paid, come back, with their kids in the middle of the school year. And these people literally have to pack up their house or sell their house and move back to the US or whatever. But I do think that much of the damage is done by the organizations themselves overreacting to the news. I know that sounds a harsh thing to say, but there have been other organizations who have basically stayed put and showed up, because there is money still going through the system, right? It's not like these organizations ran out of money today. You know, they have funding that could keep them going for a few weeks or a few months. So there is a tendency to overreact so they can show the instant effect. You know, I was watching a report about HIV clinics in South Africa just closing, and sex workers who get their combination medication from there or get tested there every month, simply not being able to access that healthcare anymore. And what is the long-term impact of that? What is the long-term impact, for instance, of another huge flare-up of HIV cases globally? But I think organizations need, because there will be legal challenges. And once you pack up a mission, once you sack everyone and people go home, if a judge comes out in 2 months' time and says the decision was unlawful, it'll be impossible to set it back up. It'll be a huge expense to set it back up. So I think people need to take a little bit of a deep breath and do as some are doing, which is challenge the decision legally and stay put in the meantime.
Yeah. Well, it was US District Judge Carl Nichols in Washington who has paused Musk's plan to fire everybody. And he was actually nominated by Trump during Trump's first term. Dare we hope to dream that some of his own appointments might backfire on him?
I mean, look, you will see the odd instances where they stand up to him But having appointed largely loyalists, those instances will be few and far between. What we're seeing is a sort of overall strategy of moving so quickly and doing so much stuff that the judicial system, the Democratic Party, the press, the media, those of them at least who still are inclined to provide some kind of scrutiny on the presidency, they simply don't have time to react to all of it. You started this segment by saying, I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
That's the point. That is the strategy.
I made this point on Newsnight on Thursday night. I was like, for years, tech companies have been rewarded for move fast and break stuff. That's their approach. And you've now got these big tech bros, notably Musk, but others too, in big appointments with incredibly serious influence over who's going to get money, which departments are going to be closed down, which are going to be scaled back, blah, blah, blah. Let's not even talk about the access to finances and Medicaid receipts and all of that. But in politics or society, that approach of move fast and break stuff won't deliver growth. It won't deliver investment and it won't deliver innovation. It's just going to cause breakdown of the structures that prevent us all from fighting for resources and with each other. And whether the appointments themselves backfire on him, I just think allowing that tech culture to permeate government and governance and decision making will certainly hurt him.
Government handles a lot of sensitive data. You have someone now in those departments who explicitly doesn't give a shit about data security, doesn't give a shit about standards.
Yeah.
These are very, very dangerous times. Like the payroll records that he now has access to include assets in other countries, paid by the government.
Quiet Riot.
Today's episode is sponsored by the wonderful people at Shopify. Alex, do you recognise that sound?
I can't say that I do.
Well, it is the sound of a sale on Shopify. I've been using Shopify for years to power the Best for Britain shop, and it's got me thinking that we definitely need to use Shopify for selling Quiet Riot merch.
Oh, and we're getting there, aren't we? We're very close to getting our first Quiet Riot merchandise up and running. I've seen some early designs. It feels like everyone but me has a side hustle nowadays. I don't even have a Substack.
Exactly. And Shopify, it just sort of like takes all of the hassle out of selling things. I don't know what we'd do without it at Best for Britain because it's an all-in-one commerce platform. You don't need to learn any tricky coding or faff around with the back end of your website. It's very much plug and play and it just works. And it means that you can just get on with selling things quickly, easily, and cost effectively.
I mean, for a small company like us, there's only the three of us. That's me sold, because the last thing I want to be doing is trying to manage yet another process. And I like the idea that Shopify can help you get selling across other marketplaces like Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, not just your own site. Because I think that actually there is the potential for our merchandise to go viral. You know, I really feel it in my bones, especially our range of Christmas jumpers. I think they will do very, very well. Plus, I hear that, unlike us, Shopify have won awards. And with an extensive business course library, they're just there ready to support a business in every way they need.
Quiet Riot listeners, Shopify want to help you to get selling as well. So they've got an incredible deal. You can sign up for a £1 only trial month at shopify.co.uk/Quiet Riot. That's all lowercase.
So go to shopify.co.uk/Quiet Riot to take your business to the next level today.
Quiet Riot.
On the flip side, late at night Friday going into Saturday, and this will get no coverage at all, guaranteed, because of all the other craziness going off, Trump reinstated the tariff loophole that allows packages worth less than $800 to enter the US duty-free,
right,
which is a big concession to China, because this is all about parallel importing, and those websites that basically you order stuff through someone that looks like an American company, but it's actually sent
from Alibaba.
Yeah. Massive concession to China. China gave nothing in return. Done in the middle of the night, no one will mention it. Elon Musk is moving on to his next target, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, of which he says they did above zero good things, but still need to go. I mean, the CFPB returned $1.8 billion to consumers who were screwed by unfair fees.
Yeah.
And it has a tiny budget, just like USAID, by the way, has a tiny budget.
Yep.
$40 billion in the context of a $7 trillion annual budget is nothing. It gets Musk and Trump nowhere near the trillions they were saying they're going to cut, right?
Yeah.
It's performative. It's because it is such a sensitive cut that will create such ripple effects around the world.
And it's all about this America first, America
absolutely,
first.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The thing I found, I think, the most distressing of everything that's happened yesterday was the stuff about the Kennedy Center. I don't know if you've heard about it. So he basically went on Truth Social to confirm news that he's sacking the entire board of trustees of the Kennedy Center, including the chairman, in order to reinstate his, and I quote, vision for a golden age in arts and culture. And he has appointed himself,
of course,
as chairman.
Who better?
Can I just tell you that from vague memories of the military junta in Greece, suddenly there were all different singers performing everywhere. It was all different presenters on TV. It was all different journalists in all the papers. It was basically regime loyalists were given all the plum jobs as reward. And people who objected to the regime were frozen out of arts and culture. And I find this genuinely the most worrying thing that has happened, because it cannot be explained by any of the economic or constitutional strategies that Trump and Musk may harbor. This is a personal vendetta and a statement from the president that I'm going to control the arts and culture that people consume. That has dictatorship writ large.
All over it.
All over it.
All over it.
I mean, all of this. He has signed more executive orders than any other peacetime president in his first 10 days.
Yes, I think I've seen a chart tracking them.
More revocations of executive orders than any other president.
So in, out, shake it all about.
Yeah. And it is that
Which
shock
is
and awe.
Your point about not overreacting to anything he does until
you have to
because he might change his mind and reinstate USAID programs
or face legal challenges, or because doing all of this seems like a massively aggressive move from them, but when forced to defend all of this, it will also stretch them thin, right? This is why we have to be considered and strategic, because once the challenges start coming in, it is them that will have to prioritize what to defend and what to junk.
Yeah, indeed.
What to take to the Supreme Court. And so take a breath. There is a lot going on. I read a fantastic article by David Frum. I think it was in The Atlantic. I'll find a link and pop it in the show notes, where he was saying that he was considering, the Canadian threat of annexation. And he was saying it was a joke. So clearly it was a joke. But as I turned it around in my mind, the joke soured. This idea that we're threatening our closest neighbor and an ally with economic sanctions unless they become the 51st state. And his quote was, "The situation was simultaneously too stupid for serious journalism and too shameful for wisecracks." And I think that's the environment we're in, right? So I'm going to leave you with this. Trump has also appointed a spiritual leader to the White House Faith Office. Her name is Paula White, and here she is in quiet prayer for the election of Trump.
I hear a sound of victory. I hear a sound of an abundance of rain. I hear a sound of victory. The Lord says it is done. In the quarters of heaven, victory, 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 victory. For angels are being released right now. Angels are being dispatched right now. Hamanda aka ata raka teda baka sanda ata ambo osa kata rite eke banda ata rike didi ashata. For angels have even been dispatched from Africa right now. Africa right now, Africa right now, from Africa right now.
Now, Christians in the US are livid. They consider her a heretic. She has a very colorful past. She left her first husband, dumped the second after cheating on him, married a member of a rock band, broke into the band's bank account and embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars after committing fraud. And she also ran a Ponzi scheme.
Oh my God.
So like I said, shock and awe, find the things that are important, find the things that you can laugh at, because actually poking fun at them, I think, is one of the most powerful weapons we can use against them. It's the thing they hate being laughed at. And let's take a deep breath.
Quiet riot.
Now, while the Bank of England may have cut interest rates this week, signs of economic recovery remain weak. Certainly, the burst of growth for which Labour had hoped and on which Rachel Reeves has based her plans largely, it's not materialised yet. Now, if you're a subscriber to Best for Britain, you'll already have had an email this morning about some work they've commissioned that offers the Chancellor a lifeline. Independent econometricians have modelled what growth might be achievable from this EU reset, and depending how far it goes. Naomi, tell us all.
Well, I am delighted to be able to finally talk about this work because it's been
You've been threatening it for a while.
We've been working on it for a long time. So a few months ago, we were looking at the red lines that the government has laid out on its relationship with Europe, which they repeat ad nauseam: no return to the single market, no return to the customs union, no return to freedom of movement. Boo, I hear everyone cry. But if we assume that that is the position and that those red lines are hard red lines and not pink, I wanted to know what growth could be achievable within those red lines from a reset relationship with the EU. And at Best for Britain, we're concerned about diverging. If you diverge too far from the EU on standards and regulations, it is incredibly costly for anyone wanting to trade with the EU, and it makes the closer relationship down the line more and more difficult. The further you separate, the harder it ever is to get back together. So we wanted independent econometricians to do this work. So we commissioned Frontier Economics to look at a few scenarios. What growth could be achieved if we go ahead with what the government has said it wants to do, which is a veterinary agreement, an SPS agreement. That's sanitary, phytosanitary for people who don't know. What growth would you get if you did alignment on goods? Not on services, and we are a service-led economy, but just on goods. And what if you did deep alignment on goods and services? So that's all within the red lines. Alignment is not joining the single market. It's not joining the customs union. And we have been really impressed with the results that have come back. I would say that they are conservative figures, so treat them as a floor, not a ceiling. And they don't model the impact of any kind of mobility scheme that might get added on to it. So we haven't modeled what growth you would also get from a youth mobility scheme. But just let me quickly run you through the headline numbers, Alex. So if you have deep alignment on goods, you're looking at between 1 to 1.5% GDP growth in the long term. So clawing back about a third of what the OBR says we've lost as a result of Brexit, which was 4%.
Better than a poke in the air with a sharp stick.
Absolutely. And if you do deep alignment with the EU and the UK on goods and services, it's between 1.7 to 2.2%. And so that is about half, clawing back even more than half of what we will have lost. So the cost of inaction is, of course, that we continue to atrophy and we recover none of that lost growth. What is possible here through the policy of deep alignment, and I can talk a bit in more detail about what that actually means later, what is on offer here is more than any other policy idea on the table, any major infrastructure project that is on the table, and more quickly. When we look at the Heathrow figures in the runway, third runway being built, that was a much smaller growth effect, and not until 2050. One final thing I would love to point out is that if you just do the SPS agreement, the veterinary agreement, the model found no statistically meaningful impact on UK GDP at all.
Wow. Yeah, that is quite stark. Now, can I ask you, I know that economists will model everything they can model, but there are obviously quite a lot of intangibles also there. What it does for business confidence, what it does for investor attractiveness. But what I wanted to focus on is how does it spread around the country?
Brilliant question. Because the levelling up agenda of the last government failed to materialise, and this government's mission for, its number one mission for economic growth, whether or not it's the fastest in the G7, who knows, but they desperately want it. And they do not just want it for London and the Southeast. And what we've shown is that when you do the deep alignment on goods in particular, you get the greatest spread of growth outside of London. So it disproportionately impacts non-London and the Southeast. West Midlands and the North get the biggest boon. Why? Well, of course, because that's where what industry we do still have tends to be located there. And they have been the most impacted by the inability to have friction-free trade at the border, both over into Northern Ireland, but very significantly into the EU as well. So having that deep alignment. What does deep alignment in goods look like? Well, we talked about it a little bit before in the show, but this is all about recognizing each other's kite marks. So the CE marking that you will see on a lot of products that are made in the EU, and the UKCA marking here in the UK, instead of, having to do both and have all of the friction of getting double certification and then all of that having to be checked at the border, you agree to mutually recognise each other's conformity assessments on product development.
And presumably on services, the equivalent would be recognising each other's qualifications, accreditation bodies and things like that.
Exactly.
Regulatory standards.
Exactly. And
competition regulators, etc., etc.
You know it all, Alex. And I think that the thing to really point out is that it's the deep alignment on goods and services that gets you the big ticket GDP growth. Why? Well, because very few goods now get sold without some kind of service attached to them. They are inextricably linked. So whether that's a warranty or a financing deal or a customer service offering that gets sold with a good as a follow-up, most firms have an element of both and don't just produce goods without any kind of service attached to them. Another thing that I think is interesting is when we look at that veterinary agreement that the government has said it wants to pursue. When you think about the Brexit deal, it's called the TCA, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. It's got different chapters in it, and it's got an SPS chapter, and it's got a technical barriers to trade chapter, which is basically the goods chapter. Yeah. And then it has the services chapter, which is very thin. When you do the SPS agreement in the model, you get the most tiny impact for some very specific sectors, and it mostly would have some benefit to Northern Ireland. But when you do deep alignment on all goods, agri-food sector gets a big boost, and you'd expect it to have got it just from the SPS bit, but no, agri-food, and if the government is worried about farmers and rural communities that it has maybe had a few arguments with over the last few months, if they want to help them out, and I'm sure they do, the deep alignment on goods is how you really get that uplift for that sector as a whole, because of the interconnectedness of a supply chain. That's why that happens.
What's in it for the EU? They already have a pretty good deal. Why should they spend time, oxygen and aggravation on this?
That is the $64 million question. Actually, probably it's about a $30 billion question because we have had a look at that. So there are a few things going on here. First of all, there's plenty that the EU want that we've got. And separate to the Brexit deal, trade deal negotiation, of course, we are in negotiations with them around defence and security. And that is certainly something that they want to do business with the UK on. And they also want to do things around mobility of people and young people and things like that. So there are some kind of like non-trade and cooperation agreement things on offer here. Mm-hmm. But we did look at what would happen to the EU and the G7 within the EU, so Italy, Germany, France. And the economic gains for both the EU and the UK under the deep alignment in goods are about equal. So we can expect a boost in exports worth about 22 billion for the UK and 19 billion for the EU. Now, of course,
spread around, that's a much smaller percentage.
States, but you would expect that because of them doing far more goods trade.
But at a time, they're also struggling with growth. Indeed, it is a chunk,
not
right?
To be sniffed at. Not to be sniffed at, that is for sure. In monetary terms, the economic benefits for both are again roughly equal. A boost in exports of about 33 billion and 30 billion, respectively. So there's that. Now, the other thing we did do as part of this work, which started months ago, was to model the impact of US tariffs on China, the EU and the UK, and what that would do to any potential growth. Now, everybody knows the EU exports far more goods to the US than the UK does, where our trade tends to be with them in services. So what deep alignment between the UK and the EU does is it shields us from about a third of the worst effects of Trump tariffs. So the EU gets hit quite disproportionately because of its trade in goods with the US. But if they are in a deep goods alignment situation with us, the UK acts as a shielding effect and could reduce by about a third the worst impacts of those tariffs on the EU. So there are some things to offer the EU in all of this. People will say, "Oh, Naomi, but mutual recognition, Theresa May tried that and got rebuffed." She didn't. What that government at the time was kind of offering was, we'll do all of our standards and regulation setting, and then you'll say that they're okay. And what deep alignment in goods would actually mean from our perspective, and we know that the government have been thinking along these lines as well, is that we would sort of jointly come up with them, and then we would agree to mutually recognise each other's conformity assessments. So it is different, and I don't think we should dismiss it out of hand just because a version of it was tried previously under Theresa May.
I have found something you might find helpful. This is Keir Starmer in his beginnings as leader. This is what he said in the Commons when he backed Boris Johnson's deal, because obviously the alternative would have been a no-deal cliff edge. But this is what he said about services.
Mr. Speaker, let me turn to services, because whatever the Prime Minister says, there's very little protection for our services in this deal. It is a gaping hole. We are primarily a services economy. Services account for 80% of our economic output. But what we've got in this text doesn't go beyond what was agreed with Canada or Japan. The lack of ambition here is striking. So pretending it's a brilliant deal just isn't on. So we're left to wonder, either the Prime Minister did not try to get a strong deal to protect our service economy, or he tried and failed.
We know from the general polling that the big MRP poll that you did a couple of weeks ago, that voters are in general in favour of prioritising the EU over the US when it comes to trade. Have you done more specific polling on this?
Absolutely. Of course we have. It's best for Britain. It's what we do. So we asked YouGov to survey 15,000 people on three things. One, answering the question, do you think that the UK and the EU should be more aligned? 41% yes, 19% no. And amongst the people who switched from the Tories to Labour, it's even higher. It's 42% saying yes. So, really, really strong support there across the country for that alignment. And when we look at that on a constituency basis, it's fantastic. It's all but two constituencies in the country saying closer alignment is the most favoured choice from voters there. Then we wanted to test, okay, so you say you want this alignment, you want the better deal between the UK and the EU, but at what cost, right? So we asked them, Would you accept some EU rules, for the UK to have to follow some EU rules to remove all of those trade barriers? 54% said yes, 29% said no. 55% of the people that switched from the Conservatives to Labour said yes. And it is the most popular option in all but one constituency in the UK. And I'll eat my hat if that one isn't Clacton, I'm sure it is. But just to be really, really sure that people want this, okay, we then asked a question that is completely hypothetical because you would never, ever, ever have to do it. We said to them, okay, you want this better deal. Would you be prepared for the UK to have to accept all EU rules in return for closer alignment? The most popular option was yes. 44% of people said yes. Accept all EU rules was the most popular option in 2/3 of constituencies across GB, which was just staggering to us and reinforced that, of course, people will be happy to live with some rules and all rules is not on the table. And don't let Reform UK tell you otherwise. Of course it isn't.
I think you have a call to action unusually for a Sunday.
Oh, yes. Look, we'll be asking people to read the report and send it to their MP. That is the main thing to do. We'll drop a link in the show notes to the report itself. And then at some point next week, we'll get and here's how you email it to your MP. But if you want to do that under your own steam in the meantime, please do.
And I have a TLDR version of everything we just talked about. Former Taoiseach Leo Varadkar gave an interview on Friday and was so beautifully succinct as to why the UK needs to pursue close alignment and what the benefits would be.
Politicians always set red lines, and then when it comes to making an agreement, some of those lines become a dark pink, and that's just the reality of politics. To avoid checks and to avoid bureaucracy, then there has to be more equivalence and more alignment on regulations. Europe is often presented as this massive bureaucracy that created all these rules and regulations. Actually, it does the reverse. It has harmonised the rules and regulations of 27 different countries, and that makes trade easier, provides for economic growth, gives people lower prices and higher living standards.
Quiet Riot. This episode is brought to you by Abercrombie. Build your fits of the day with Abercrombie's newest denim drop. Here's where to start. Abercrombie's 90s straight jean goes with any shirt from tees to sweater polos. Super versatile. Their loose and baggy jeans are more trend forward, so you can grab those and go out with your friends. Abercrombie's denim fits come in a range of washes. Build your looks around Abercrombie denim. Shop online or in store.
Quiet Riot. And just before we wrap up, while I've been busy with all of that work on our growth report, you've been keeping a very keen eye on Westminster, Alex, and I think you've noticed a few interesting nuggets about poll toppers Reform UK. Your spidey senses, I feel they're buzzing. Tell me more.
Yeah, there's been a really concerted move this week to distance themselves from Brexit and Johnson. Johnson apparently was the worst UK PM in history. Both Nigel Farage on Radio 4 and Zia Yusuf have said words to this effect. He gave an interview on Nick Robinson's podcast. No one has brought up the fact that Farage did a deal in 2019 and withdrew all of their Tory-facing candidates so that Johnson could get in. And then there was a piece in the Telegraph that made me really angry. The title was Northern Ireland Dragged into Trump's Trade War because of Brexit deal, right? Belfast could be forced to impose higher EU taxes on US goods in tit-for-tat tariff battle. And it included a quote from Farage, who says 100% Northern Ireland risks being collateral damage of a US-EU trade war. The botched Brexit deal has effectively cast Northern Ireland out of the UK. Now, the Telegraph and Farage supported Brexit in the first place, and you will know that they may not agree with this, but there's a school of thought that says Northern Ireland was always going to be a big problem when we left the EU.
Yep.
They also, as I said, did a deal to let Johnson in, backing his trade deal because they thought the alternative would be a second referendum. So it was better to get it done, and then they could work on improving it. And they also shook their pom-poms vigorously for Trump, who had threatened a tariff war. So not only this occurs to them just now, but they're presenting it like some sort of inexplicable weather phenomenon. A big boy came and imposed tariffs, and we don't know what that means for Northern Ireland post-Brexit. I mean, I find that...
In Brussels, this is all anyone was really talking about. And David Hennig, our trade advisor at Western Britain, got asked this question last week more than ever. If Trump does tariffs on the EU, what will happen to Northern Ireland, which, of course, is not in the EU, but is essentially in the single market for goods, and could a way round it for the EU be to just export everything through Northern Ireland? And nobody seems to know the legal answer. So if anybody listening does, do let us know.
The flip side of that is that I think Labour may have identified a big vulnerability with reform, and that's their NHS policy.
Yeah.
Because they have said things in the past that indicate they would like some sort of insurance system.
Yeah.
Basically, it was a planted question. We're all adults here. You got a backbencher to ask a question about their plan to privatize the NHS and responded to it. And they seemed really rattled, and they've been going on about it all week. Now, I don't think that will have an effect in the local elections because the NHS is not really a dividing line, because people tend to vote protest in mid-term elections of any kind.
And they know that it's about the potholes and the street lamps, not about their hospital.
Exactly. So I'm sure the local elections will reflect their poll standing, but I think this is a major, major vulnerability for them if they go into a general election. And I think it is one where, weirdly, Labour and the Conservatives can join hands and the Lib Dems and the Greens, and really hammer them on this. And I think the narrative that you vote reform at your peril, they will dismantle the NHS, I think it is something that will be very effective. And they're plainly not prepared for it because they were floundering at PMQs. Let's have a listen.
You are not committed to the model as it currently exists and would be open, therefore, to an insurance-based model in the future.
Open to anything.
Open to anything, fine.
Honourable Member for Clacton says that his party is, and I quote, open to anything when it comes to changing our NHS and open to an insurance-based system. So can my right honourable friend confirm that under a Labour government, the NHS will be there for everyone when they need it, not having to worry about the bill? Mr. Speaker, the NHS is the lifeblood of our country, and that's why we invested £25 billion at the budget, a record amount, and we're making it fit for the future through our plan for change. What a contrast with reform, whose leader has said that those who can afford to pay should pay for our healthcare. Under Labour, the NHS will always be free at the point of use for anyone who needs it.
Mr. Speaker, if I can assure the honourable member for Rugby that Reform want healthcare to be free at the point of delivery. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. There appears to be some panic on that side of the House. I'm not surprised.
And with that, Naomi, we need to draw Sunday school to a close. We've kept people in detention for an extra 20 minutes, as is now the custom. Good luck with the growth work Roulette tomorrow.
Thank you, Alex. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget that our bookshop, our Ko-Fi, our calls to action can always be found in the show notes of every episode, and all the support you can give us, no matter how small, goes a very, very long way to helping keep Quiet Riot on the road.
Now, we'll be back on Thursday with the main show, but for now, take a deep breath, relax, enjoy what's left of the weekend, safe in the knowledge that at least we love you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Soundstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
No, I'm not all right. I'm actually in a stinky mood. I don't know why. I just woke up on the wrong side of the bed.
Lucky me.
Sometimes it's just